Ready? Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad you're here today. We're going to the circus. We are going to go to the Ringling family home in Kazazan, and I would like to introduce our board chair, Liza Morehouse, to introduce the evening. Thank you so much.
Good evening and welcome. Welcome to Morven. And isn't it nice to be considering balmy climes of Florida in its hot, sizzling heyday on this wintry evening? This is the third in our series of 4 presentations of Grand Homes and Gardens for 2022, and this one is truly dazzling. The background material for Kazan, which means House of John in a Venetian dialect, states that it, quote, stands as a testament to the American dream of the Roaring Twenties, unquote. Of course, Morven and its various inhabitants were fundamental to the birth and furtherance of the original American dream. So this is a fitting venue from which to offer a presentation about this remarkable and glorious American masterpiece. We hope you will enjoy a glamorous glimpse into the showplace of a circus entrepreneur and his wife, John and Mable Ringling. It seems Mable was as much of an artistic and leading influence in her household as Anna Spudino Stockton was here at Morven in the 18th century. Both were strong, educated women with vision. This evening's program should entice you to come back to Morven often and to join us as members if you are not already. You can take part in all our varied and intriguing programs and activities and bring family and friends. Kazan will wow and impress you, I think. This is very Ringling for sure. Enjoy your visit and get inspired to dream big as we here at Morven do. And now, into the big top. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Debra Lampert-Rudman. I'm the Curator of Education and Public Programs here at Morven Museum and Garden. And I am delighted to welcome Marissa Hershon live from Sarasota, Florida's the John and Mable Ringling Museum of Art this evening. Marissa is the Ringlings Curator of Decorative Arts, and most importantly, for those of us gathered in Princeton and around the world on Zoom, she is curator of the Kazan, described as the last of the Gilded Age mansions to be built in America. Marissa came to the Kazan from the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, Texas, where she performed curatorial duties in the Department of Decorative Arts, Craft, and Design. Her past employers include the Cincinnati Art Museum, the Chrysler Museum of Art in Norfolk, Virginia, and the National Museum of Women in the Arts, Washington, D.C. She's a graduate of Tulane University and received her Master of Arts degree from the Smithsonian Associates and the Corcoran College of Art and Design. An accomplished lecturer in the decorative arts, including glass and silver, Marissa is also a widely published author, having appeared in publications such as the magazine Antiques and Silver Magazine. Please buckle up as we set off on our grand road trip to Sarasota, Florida with Marissa Hershon to visit glorious Kazan.
Thank you so much for the invitation to speak this evening, and I'll just share my screen. And just a sec. All right, so hopefully everybody can see the PowerPoint, and thank you all for coming this evening. I was looking forward to visiting Princeton for my first ever visit, but due to COVID, I'm sharing this from afar. So here we go. So as you've already heard, Kazan was the winter residence of John and Mable Ringling in Sarasota, Florida. It has been revered as an architectural gem since it was completed in 1926, and its name means House of John in the Venetian dialect, as the Ringlings were very much inspired by the art and architecture of Venice. So tonight we'll explore the unique elements of this Mediterranean revival masterpiece and how its exterior, the beautiful interiors, and all of its furnishings come together to reflect the Ringlings' taste. And we'll also look at how the Ringlings spent their time at Cottazon during winters, entertaining friends and family. But before I go into greater detail about the house itself, I'd first like to just step back and give you a little bit of background information about the museum's campus, where Cottazon is situated. Unlike many house museums in America, Cottazon is not an isolated or independent site, but rather it is a highly visible part of a 66-acre museum campus with a number of venues for visitors to explore. Since 1946, the John and Mable Ringling Museum of Art has been the State Art Museum of Florida, and in 2000, the museum came under Florida State University as its parent organization. The Ringling celebrates the legacy of the circus magnate, entrepreneur, and art collector John Ringling and his wife Mabel. The museum is best known for its European art collection, and we have a Ringlings gallery that you can see here. And our Baroque art is also internationally renowned. We also tell the story of the American circus in the Circus Museum that was founded in 1948 by the first director of the museum. And also we have a number of later additions after the Museum of Art, where you can see the courtyard up here and the beautiful grounds. There also is the historic Oslo Theater, which was brought from Italy and installed in the museum, and it still offers a performing arts series today. We also have a James Turrell Sky Space that you see here, and that was built in 2011. And also we have a Center for Asian Art that was a wing added on to the museum, and the Kotler Koval Glass Pavilion, that is another area of the collection that I oversee, that is our contemporary glass. And then we are also an arboretum that includes the rose garden that Mable Ringling planted in 1913. So John Ringling established the Ringling Brothers Circus along with 4 of his brothers in 1886, and they became widely known as circus kings for creating one of the most influential and popular traveling entertainments of the era. They later bought a number of other circuses and merged shows together, eventually becoming Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, that was known as the greatest show on earth. While in American popular culture, the Ringling name is most associated with the circus, John Ringling actually was far more ambitious than just working on the circus alone. So he expanded his business interests and investments over the years to include oil, banks, railroads, real estate, and ranches, among other things. And he also became an art collector and self-taught connoisseur. And he wished to leave a philanthropic legacy, which is the Ringling Museum today. John and Mable Ringling married in 1905 in Hoboken, New Jersey at age 39 and 30 respectively, and both were of Midwestern backgrounds. And we don't know exactly how they met, but on their marriage certificate, John interestingly listed himself as a capitalist for his profession, and that definitely reflects that he had ambitions beyond the circus. However, he did travel with the circus for many years and was often on the road. And here you can see John and Mable on a circus backlot in Boston around the time they were married. And you can also see John Ringling on the circus backlot in another location talking to all of the circus employees before a show. Despite its extravagance, Cottazon was not their primary residence, but actually a seasonal residence. So they had a luxury apartment at 636 Fifth Avenue, and this is where they based themselves in Manhattan when they weren't traveling around the country or to Europe. And then when Mable Ringling died in 1929, this building was also torn down around that time to make way for Rockefeller Center. So we no longer know what their apartment looked like or what it had in it. And then John Ringling had another apartment on Park Avenue in the 1930s before he passed away in 1936. So John and Mable were based in the north, and they were snowbirds who spent the winters in Florida. And they also had a summer estate in Alpine, New Jersey. And here is a picture of Gray Crag that they bought in 1919. And this is where they spent the summer months. But this house was actually torn down in the 1930s when the Palisades Interstate Parkway was built. So this really shows you how rare it is for a place like Cottazon to still survive from the 20s. And the Ringlings first came to Southwest Florida in 1909, and that was just a visit to see friends. And then in 1911, they bought this property where the Ringling estate is now, but it was called Palms Elysian at the time. And this house dated to 1895. So they spent over 10 years in this home after making some minor renovations, and came and visited for a number of years before they embarked on their vision for Cottazon, and also for changing Sarasota and making it a center for the arts and a glamorous resort town. So they commissioned the architect Dwight James Baum to design Cottazon, and he was based in New York and was a highly prolific and influential architect of his time, although his name is not well known today. But he was very highly respected for designing a range of revival style suburban homes and country estates. And you may have heard of the Fieldston neighborhood in the Bronx. That's where his practice and home were located, as well as dozens of homes that he has designed there that are still private residences today. Much of the design process for Cottazon has been lost, but we are fortunate to have a number of floor plans and blueprints that show the evolution of the design. And this one may be difficult to read, but I will just point out one detail to keep in mind as we move along, that there is, this is the first floor, and there is this large space here that is called, in this drawing, the patio and loggia. So it's designated as an open air space, so open to the elements, and then rooms surround it, the principal rooms for entertaining. And this changed as the clients worked with the architect. And eventually they came to the decision to create a great hall with a roof and a skylight. So here is that same space. And the reason why that space became enclosed was likely because they commissioned an Aeolian residential organ to go in this space, and that needed to be protected from the weather. So just to orient you to all of the rooms on the first floor, here is the entrance to the house from the garden terrace. And there's a large reception room as you enter the home. Then there's a lounging room, and this was an open air solarium or porch. Now it's glassed in. Then there's a ballroom. The great hall is the heart of the home. Then for informal dining is the breakfast room looking out on the bay. There are the dining room here for formal entertaining, and a tap room or bar. And then this whole wing is the service wing, where there's a kitchen, a pantry, and then rooms for their staff. So this is a 36,000 square foot home. It is a very large home and an impressive home, and meant to be a showplace for entertaining. And here is a beautiful watercolor and ink drawing that is a presentation drawing by Earl Purdy, who was an architect who worked in Baum's office. And I love this image because it really conveys the romantic and pseudo-historic atmosphere of Cottazon, set in this beautiful tropical landscape. So this is the facade that faces the water, the bay. And just to orient you, here is the solarium that's open air that you could come in after swimming the pool. The ballroom's here. This is the great hall in the center of the house. The breakfast room looks out on the bay. And then here, this whole space is service wing spaces. And then there's a beautiful Belvedere Tower to take in views. But there are some changes between this and the final design as it was executed. You'll notice that this beautiful dock has turned out quite differently when I show you the final image in a few seconds. This here has a curved staircase that frames a beautiful statue and fountain, and that ended up getting revised at some point to be a straight staircase down to the lower dock. You'll also see Venetian canal poles down here by the water, giving it that Venetian feel, and a gondola. And Mable Ringling did indeed have a gondola shipped from Venice to Sarasota, and it made the local newspaper when it arrived because that was big news back then. So this drawing actually came into the Ringlings collection in 2010, so not that long ago. And at some point, we don't know when or how, but somebody found it in an antique store and notified us about it. So we're very happy to have it now. But at one point it was on view in Dwight James Baum's office. This is a picture of his library that was published in 1924. So you can see how he displayed it with pride in his architecture office. And here is a view of the west facade as it was finally realized. So you can see the beautiful marble terrace with the chevron pattern and the steps leading down to the lower dock. And here again is the east facade facing the garden. So this is the facade that guests would have arrived at and come inside. And the construction took place from 1924 to 1926. And we're really fortunate to have a scrapbook of photos taken by the construction superintendent. So it gives us a wonderful sense of 1920s construction techniques. You can see the terrace, marble terrace here in the lower photo, having the infrastructure put in place. This image here is of the court with its columns being installed. This is the east facade where you can see straight through to the bay. There's no door yet. And then the tower is being constructed here. You can see the scaffolding leading up. So these images are really a wonderful documentation of how this amazing house came together. And there are a few interior shots of the house from this scrapbook that I find really intriguing. This one in particular is a wonderful snapshot of the mezzanine. So this is the upper level of the Great Hall. And you can see there is a terracotta balustrade and columns and frieze in place. And then above it is the Pecky cypress ceiling. However, it hasn't been painted yet with a number of ornamental details that adorn it now. And you can also see several canvas paintings hanging as if to dry on the wall. And these actually were incorporated in the doors on the mezzanine. And each door has two different paintings on it that depict architectural ruins and picturesque landscapes that are looking back to the 18th century genre in Italian art of capricci or capriccio for singular. And these are just one of the many eclectic design elements found throughout the house. And basically any surface that could be seen as an opportunity for ornament was used for that. And before we look inside in greater detail, I just wanted to give you a glimpse of all the beautiful details on the exterior, especially the terracotta. Mediterranean Revival style was a very popular typology in the early 1900s and 1920s in Florida, as a number of wealthy Northerners were moving here and building winter residences. But Cadazan definitely stands out as unique from other examples of this style because the Venetian Gothic elements are so strong and predominant in this house. So you'll see beautiful colored glass panes throughout the home with these wonderful arches that reflect the Gothic style. And then a lot of the beautiful windows are topped by these floral and fruit bouquets that are inspired by Venetian examples. You'll also see a range of Italianate ornament from the Renaissance that inspired the beautiful colors and glazes on the house. And then this is a balustrade from up in the Belvedere Tower that shows some wonderful mythological creatures incorporated. So there's really a wonderful range of historicizing elements all over the facades. And we could spend all day looking at the exterior, but move along to show you a few other views. This is looking at the loggia or balcony off of John Ringling's bedroom from the service wing entrance. And this element is a beautiful design that's inspired by Roman palazzi. And we also have these wonderful images from the period when Cartizan was nearing completion. And these were taken by O.W. Ketchum Terracotta Works. They were the firm that was commissioned to create all of this custom terracotta ornament on the house. And they were based out of Philadelphia and brought all of these elements down to Florida to have them installed, including this wonderful frieze that is featured on the tower of the house. You can see here, and it's surrounded by that beautiful brickwork. And heading up to the Belvedere Tower, get a nice bird's eye view of it here. It's really a beautiful space to take in the views out on the bay and to the gardens. And this frieze up above features the 12 symbols of the zodiac. And then there are 4 turrets on the corners that have these wonderful creatures. There's owls and cats and squirrels that ornament those. And the terracotta is really stunning in the Florida sunshine. It really warmly glows, and this is how it looks on any given day down here. And that wonderful glow of the house is beautifully captured in this article from 1927. Shortly after the house was completed at the end of 1926, it received a lot of press, and Country Life magazine, this feature was quite a big deal at the time. The article was titled A Venetian Palace in Florida, and Cartizan has been nicknamed that for many years since. And this article features beautiful watercolors that really capture the essence of the home. The author also noted many of the Venetian-inspired elements of the house that are really recognizable if you're an architecture nerd like me. So here you can see Palazzo Ducale, or the Doge's Palace in Venice, and how it has this lower arcade and then another arcade above with quatrefoils. And you see how that quotation has been taken into this center section of Cartizan, that is the west wall of the Great Hall. And the Ringlings, with their architect, traveled to Venice a number of times to collect ideas like this that they wanted incorporated in the home. Next, we'll take a look at the Ringlings' lifestyle and how Cartizan became a center of social activity for them. So they traveled by their private Pullman rail car. This is the Wisconsin. It's named after John Ringling's home state. And this is how they traveled around the country. And this is akin to having your own private jet today. So it was very luxurious to have this at the time. And here you can see the interior with the dining room. There's also a sleeping area and space for their staff. Typically, their chauffeur and others traveled with them. And then after arriving in Sarasota at the railroad station, they would typically be driven to their estate. And here's the gatehouse that is designed in the same style as the house, and it still welcomes visitors today. And here is the variety of luxury cars they had at the time. We don't have these anymore in the collection, but these were very high-end automobiles for them to ride in style. And they would have entered through the main entrance, this beautiful, impressive Gothic revival screen and door welcomes you into the reception room. So this is quite a large reception room. It's definitely larger than most homes you will see. And it is filled with tapestries from the 17th century, Italian cassone or wedding chests, and a range of French furniture and revival style furniture. Also, there are architectural fragments and elements incorporated into the house, like these Solomonic columns that frame the entry to this room from the lounging room. And you see a number of pieces of older architectural fragments throughout the home. And also, in most of the rooms, the ceilings are painted with custom designs, and that's what you see here. There's a beautiful vine motif that was painted by Robert Webb Jr., who was one of a number of decorative painters that the Ringlings worked with to ornament their house. So the house has an interpretive period set to 1926 to 1929 that generations of stewards have tried to follow and recreate the looks of the interiors from when the Ringlings resided here. So wherever possible, the museum has tried to place items in the collection where they have been historically situated. And so we have historic evidence from a number of family photos in an album that show us what the house looked like when the Ringlings were here. And you're looking at a view from the reception room up to, this is the elevator lobby and grand staircase that goes up to the upper levels. And there is a wonderful example of 19th century reproduction of an 18th century form here. The metal cabinet is based on an example from Versailles when the royal palace was the residence of Louis XV. And the Ringlings bought a lot of reproduction furniture at the time. They are very much looking to the styles and decor of the Gilded Age and trying to emulate that as they were trying to make an impression on their guest and impart a feeling that they were part of the highest echelons of American society from a generation earlier. And Cottazon has been called one of the last Gilded Age estates, but it's actually post-Gilded Age. It's an homage to the Gilded Age. It's very much looking to that turn of the century, late 19th, early 20th century, to how grand homes were furnished and designed at that time and trying to recreate those fashions. And here you see a few images of the Great Hall as it appeared when they lived here. And this wasn't a static space when they were in residence. They would change up the furnishings and have these conversational groupings or have concerts in the Great Hall. And so they often changed where things were placed. And Mable often hosted dances, music performances, and bridge parties at the home as well as throughout Sarasota. So here you get a view of the Great Hall from the mezzanine above, and you can get a sense of how large this space is. And the beautiful ceiling is painted with wonderful Venetian-inspired designs on the Pecky cypress. And then behind the tapestries that you see lining the wall are chambers for the Aeolian organ. So while the console is downstairs, upstairs are all of the pipes and instrument parts, and that would give a sense of surround sound at the time. So here is the Aeolian organ console, and it would have been used for private performances at their home. It was very fashionable in the early 20th century to host musicales. So this would have been a private concert. And we have newspapers that reported about their events. So in 1928, it's been recorded that they had 300 guests over to their house for a Sunday afternoon concert with an organist playing a 1-hour program and then a piano concert on their Steinway afterwards. And then their guests were invited to just enjoy the views off of the terrace and the grounds. But the Aeolian organ has not functioned in a number of years. However, we are really excited to share that the Ringling received a grant from the Wincoat Foundation recently for $1.5 million to support the restoration of the organ. So hopefully in the next year, we'll have our contractor come take all of the organ parts out of the house and then work on it offsite and bring it back in a few years. So hopefully by our 100th anniversary in 2026, will be able to have a working musical instrument and host performances in the Great Hall again. And Cotazon had a major $15 million restoration that took place from 1996 to 2002. And that was a huge project that covered the exterior, the interiors, and many of the collection items amongst the furnishings. But we continue to work on historic preservation to this day. It's an ongoing responsibility that we shepherd at the Ringling and work with a number of colleagues in the field of conservation. And back in 2020, we did a restoration of these windows on the mezzanine. So these were removed and re-leaded to make them stronger and to keep water out of the house. And this whole wall was also restored that you're looking at here because of years of water damage and water intrusion. We had repointing of the mortar for the terracotta on the exterior, along with the windows, and then refinished the beautiful faux finish on the inside. So this wall is actually plaster, but it's meant to look like faux travertine stone. And we're hoping to do future phases of that project, continuing to do the rest of the windows in the house as funding becomes available. So moving on to the dining room, this is where they would have hosted dinner parties. And this is a beautiful walnut paneled room. We believe the walnut paneling may have come out of an earlier residence, possibly a home from Europe, but it's still one of the mysteries that I get to research. And the ceiling in this room is also another amazing design. It is made out of plaster and has a beautiful geometric coffering that is in the Moorish Revival style, but it's all been painted with a faux wood grain. So it looks like beautiful wood paneling when it actually is not. And that was also done by the artist Robert Webb Jr., who did a number of ceilings in the home. And he worked with a number of American and European artisans in the house. And the original furnishings are still in place in this room. We also have a range of dining ware sets for different occasions. So you can see everything here from your daily china to a much more formal set of plates. And then we also have a set of silver flatware, one of a number of these, and this one is in the Tiffany & Company Persian ware pattern. Now moving on to the ballroom, the breakfast room. This was for informal dining, and it's beautifully captured in this photo. I think this really gives you a sense of how the Ringlings lived here. So this room is off of the Great Hall, and there's a screen here in the entrance, and also a number of bird cages here and a bird stand because Mabel had a number of pet birds. And you can see a bit of bric-a-brac in the room there, and also a beautiful still life painting by De Heem, who was one of the leading 17th century Flemish painters. And this painting has been in the Museum of Art for many years, but originally the Ringlings lived with it, and it has exquisite detail. It's really stunning to see in person, and I hope you can get a sense of it here. But I think it's interesting that they chose to put this in the breakfast room because you can see a range of food, fruit, oyster, crustaceans, and then there's beautiful glassware and silverware and gilt goblets and birds, of course, which I think were especially appealing to Mabel as she had a number of pets. And here you can see her in her garden in New Jersey, and then a small painting by Robert Webb that he painted for her. And here is the breakfast room as it appears today. So with far less clutter in it, but in terms of allowing thousands of visitors to come through the house, we definitely had to make a pathway for them. And you can see this beautiful harlequin floor that extends from the Great Hall into this space. Next, we're looking at the ballroom. So this space is across the Great Hall from the breakfast room, and it has another amazing ceiling. This one is titled Dancers of the Nations, and it was painted by Louis Pagani, who was a New York-based artist and designer who created 26 canvases in his studio and then came to Sarasota for 10 days in 1926 to install these in the gilt coffered ceiling. And he also painted the border that we'll look at in a few minutes. But this ceiling, I think, is the most striking one in the house. It really shows how the Ringlings were trying to impress their guests by showing that they were worldly and well-traveled and were educated about different world cultures. And it's a reflection of a design trend that's known today as cosmopolitan domesticity. So starting in the late 19th century, there was this trend for affluent households to have whole rooms dedicated to different cultures, and this falls under that trend. And here you can see there's a range of different cultures depicted, from ancient Egyptian. You also see flamenco dancers from Spain. And here is an American couple dancing the Charleston. So there's really quite a variety here. And just one detail of the panel that depicts Japanese geishas. I've been researching possible design sources for these elements, and at the time there were a lot of photography studios producing these kinds of images to sell to Westerners and tourists who were very curious about Japan. And these posed studio photographs likely are what Pagani used for inspiration. And the border is beautifully designed with Italianate motifs. These are inspired by grotesque ornaments with this vertical movement of design with floral and foliate motifs and sphinxes and winged putti that border the ceiling. Next, we'll take a look at the tap room. So this was the Ringlings' own private bar. And during Prohibition era, yes, this was quite a luxury to have your own wood paneled room with a beautifully veneered elbow rest at the bar. And then there are a number of different kinds of art glass throughout this room. There are beautiful enameled figural scenes behind the bar. There's the colored glass panels looking out onto the garden. There's also these panes that have grapevine motifs, which is quite fitting for the tap room. And then there's a whole landscape scene across from the bar with a hunter in the landscape. And you'll also notice that there's a pair of longhorns above the bar, which may seem a bit unusual, but those were a gift from John Ringling's friend, the Texan Amon Carter. And you may recognize that name because he later founded a museum in Fort Worth bearing his name. And there is a wonderful array of holiday greetings and telegrams in our archives. And this one is from Amon Carter saying, "Howdy, folks," and wishing them a Merry Christmas. And it's really wonderful to look at these kinds of documents and try to reconstruct their social network. So we're in the middle now of better documenting these letters and correspondence to try to rebuild their network of friends around the country and around the world. And there's a wonderful collection of postcards in our collection, but this actually comes from a private collection and is one of my favorite postcards of Cadazan. It has this beautiful coloration on it. And this was actually used by the Ringlings to send a thank you note for Christmas greetings, as you can see on the back of the card here. So now we will head up to the second floor to look at the primary bedroom. So John Ringling's bedroom is connected en suite to Mabel's, and then he has an office space, and then the balcony of the mezzanine along that space is where all of the guest bedrooms are, and then there are all the bedrooms for their staff that lived and worked at the home. So both of their rooms are inspired by French decorative arts and design. In John Ringling's bedroom, you see the Empire Revival suite of furniture that is definitely meant to impress. and he was definitely looking to Napoleonic royal precedents in fashion here with this beautiful mahogany suite, and it's ornamented with ormolu mounts, these gilt bronze mounts that have a lot of Napoleonic imagery, and this one includes a mermaid on the side of the bed. And then in Mable Ringling's room, it's a little more subdued with the Rococo Revival suite of furniture in that space that is also a reproduction of 18th century design, and these really whimsical, fun monkeys on swings ornament the furniture in that space. And then there are several guest bedrooms, and this one features the furniture that is original to the space, as well as bathrooms that are connected to each of these rooms. And interestingly, while most of the house looks to the past for inspiration, these bathrooms are very much of the moment and are a reflection of Art Deco design with these beautiful, colorful tiles. And also each of the medicine cabinets in the bathrooms are painted with different scenes inspired by chinoiserie or Asian-inspired elements. And then there are several bedrooms on the service wing side of the house where their staff lived. And we have documentation of the people that worked for them from census records, but much information has been lost. But we are lucky to have this photo of Hedwig Tomlinson, who was a longtime employee and maid for Mable Ringling, and her husband was a valet for John Ringling. And there is an annunciator call bell system located downstairs in the kitchen space that would ring when any of the call buttons were pressed throughout the house. So for instance, if someone's at the front door, the bell would ring and the arrow would point to the space where help was needed. Now, continuing up to the third floor, there's one large room on the third floor, and it is the playroom. And it has another fabulous ceiling design by Willie Pagani. This one is inspired by Venetian Carnival, which is quite fitting given their interest in Venice. And in addition to the ceiling canvas being applied to the vaulted ceiling, each of the pillars that holds up the space has beautiful renderings of different masked revelers from Venetian Carnival. And it's a very interesting space. It's an L-shaped space, and it's rather dark since it's underneath the eaves of the roof, but there's a wonderful focal point to the ceiling that is this portrait of John and Mable Ringling in very festive attire, surrounded by their menagerie of pets. They had a number of miniature pinchers. They had their German Shepherd, and then a number of pet birds that they brought with them to Cotazon. And of course, they have lots of socializing and events at the home. So here you see Mable Ringling sitting in front of the house, along with her mother, Mary, and two of her sisters. And Mable encouraged a lot of her family and relatives to come visit them in Sarasota and also have homes here. So here you see her with her siblings and her brother and her sister, Dulcie, who is her youngest sister. Her descendants have a number of items that once belonged to Mable that they have given back to the museum over the years, including this gorgeous dress from the 1920s. This was a couture dress custom made for Mable by Francis dressmakers in New York. And it features beautiful hand-sewn rhinestones and beadwork, as well as this beautiful silk gauze dress that really is probably meant for dancing, with that hem with the significant swirl and spread. And it's also beautifully decorated with beadwork and rhinestones as well. But when Mable was at Cotazon and not entertaining, she was actually often found on the state in her knee-high boots with even a pistol on her hip, according to local lore, because this was still a very rural area and you can encounter a lot of wildlife on the estate. At the time, she probably was traipsing around and it was quite swampy, but she was very much involved in planting the gardens. And here you can see the rose garden with its Italianate design. And none of these roses that were originally planted survive today, but we have continued to replant varieties that Mable had in the garden. And John Ringling was also a dapper dresser. Here you can see him by the pool at Cotazon and wearing one of his polka dot ties. We have a lot of his clothes in Cotazon's collection, and these were custom or bespoke silk French ties that he had. And here's another view of him in front of Cotazon wearing another colorful tie. We have closets full of his clothes. We have his pants, his suits, his hats, his canes, his shoes. So if anybody wanted to write a thesis on men's fashion in the 20s and 30s, they would have a heyday with this collection. So Charles Ringling, John's brother, also built a mansion next door. So his family was nearby as well. And these aerial views give you a sense of what this area looked like at the time. It was still largely undeveloped when they were here in the 1920s. And the town, Sarasota, was barely 2,000 people. It was a very small fishing village. It was very remote. And yet they had a vision that they really wanted to see this city become a great destination. And so Cotazon was a part of that, as well as building the art museum in the 1920s. So the Ringlings enlisted the architect John Phillips to build an Italian palazzo-inspired art museum. And they also had planned a crypt below the walkway that connects two wings of the museum. And here's the design by John Phillips. This crypt design was meant to have alabaster carved screens and beautiful glasswork and other materials, as well as two sarcophagi for John and Mable, as this would have been their final resting place as part of the Memorial Art Museum. But this design was actually never completed. So this space underneath that walkway is still empty and unfinished to this day. And above it is the famous replica of the David statue by Curator, the Italian sculpture company that created a lot of reproductions at the time. So eventually the Ringlings were buried on the estate. They are buried in what's known as the Secret Garden, and it happened in the 1990s, so many years later. But in the 1920s, John Ringling was very busy in Sarasota when he was here in season, offering tours of the museum to visitors. And here is a group of friends in politics that came to visit for vacation in Florida. So John Ringling took them to play golf and to dine at Cotazon and to visit the winter quarters of the circus that was moved to Florida, and also tour the museum. And you can see here the governor of New York at the time, Al Smith, amongst this party that was visiting one winter. And the Ringlings also were often on the water with their friends and family. They had a huge yacht commissioned in 1922, the Zalophus, that was 120 feet long. So quite impressive. And this is how they showed visitors around the waterfront of the city and the islands and various developments where John Ringling was working in real estate. And this was built in New York and had a cruising radius of 4,000 miles. And Mable Ringling christened it in 1922, but it was not actually completed and brought down to Florida until 1924. And it had a crew of 12. And that included a captain that the Ringlings had a cottage on the estate where the captain and his family lived. So they were always available and ready to go out on the water. And while the Ringlings were building Cotazon, they made a number of visits to Sarasota to check on the building's progress and would often stay in the Zalophus when it was docked in the downtown harbor until the house was completed. Here is a look of the main deck that was 86 feet long approximately, so plenty of space to entertain. And here is the indoor space, the living room off of the deck that is luxuriously appointed with a range of furniture. And they definitely spent a lot of money on this houseboat. Here's another view of that room, so it's quite spacious. There also are several cabins below deck, including 4 large and 2 small staterooms for the owner and guests. And there were also rooms for their maids and valets and the crew of the ship. Also on board, there was a dining room and a kitchen and pantry, as well as spaces for the staff to lounge and dine as well. And we're lucky to have a few photos of the Ringlings enjoying their yacht. Here's Mabel with one of her pet dogs on deck, and then John and Mable enjoying their boat. They had previously owned a variety of yachts before this one, but this was definitely their largest and most impressive, and definitely quite a statement to have a yacht of this size and caliber. It was quite a status symbol. And they were often taking friends and family on fishing excursions. And here is the Zalophus dock downtown. So here you can see the yacht club and behind it. And also this is Hotel Vernona, which unfortunately was torn down years ago, but it was another architectural design by Baum in Sarasota. And here is a group about to board the Zalophus, probably in the late 1920s. So you can see Mabel here and her mother. This is one of John Ringling's nephews and his sister, one of Mabel's sisters. And here is one of their friends, William J. Burns, who was a very famous detective. He was known as America's Sherlock Holmes. And as one of John's friends, he invited him to Florida to see his developments and encouraged him to buy a plot of land in Sarasota, which he did, and he built this home. So if you're not familiar with Sarasota, the area known as St. Armand's Circle is a very high-end residential area that surrounds a circle with shops and restaurants, and this is one of the homes from the 20s that was built in the Mediterranean Revival style as part of that development. And here is a view of the Ringling Isles that John was working on. So he didn't just influence Sarasota in terms of bringing his art museum here and the circus here. He also had a number of real estate developments underway, and he built a causeway out to the Keys as well, so that these areas that at first could only be reached by water could also be reached by car. And this is St. Armand's Circle, and it's still a very popular area for going out today. The Ringlings also had a nursery out on Longboat Key, one of the barrier islands, where they likely took trips to by boat. And this is where they grew hundreds of palms and other exotic plants and brought them to their estate and to their other properties to give them this tropical appearance and to appeal to northern buyers that they wanted to attract to the area. So they very much were promoting Sarasota as a resort to welcome people to escape from the cold winters. And they also socialized with a number of circus connections. So here, one of the group in the boating party is Fred Bradna, and he was a very famous equestrian director in his time. He worked in European circuses before he came to the US with his wife, Ella. And she was also an equestrian performer. And here you see them before a show and in their tents getting ready for a performance. And the Ringlings were friendly with a number of the many performers that worked in the circus, as they were often here in the winters as well, since the winter quarters were relocated here from Bridgeport, Connecticut. So for visiting snowbirds and tourists, they could come by the winter quarters and see acts being rehearsed and performed, animals being trained, and it was quite a big tourist attraction into mid-century. So these postcards date to like the 50s and 60s. But this was a very popular attraction until the circus winter quarters moved to Venice, so a little further south in Florida. And it's still a very big part of Sarasota's culture and history. Sadly, the Zalophus sunk in 1930, so it is no longer, but John Ringling was away on business in New York and had lent his boat to friends, which he often did, and they were taking it on an overnight excursion to an island when it ran aground, and his business associate, Sam Gumberts, and his family were helped off the yacht by the crew as it sunk in 12 feet of water, and there was also the New York mayor, Jimmy Walker, aboard with his mistress, Betty Compton, a famous actress. But because they were not married, there was a lot of hush-hush cover-up in the newspaper, so their names were not revealed at the time, but it later became known that they were on the yacht. But all that's left of the yacht today, unfortunately, is the steering wheel and some equipment that was salvaged from the wreck. However, John Ringling still had other boats that he could use, including his 52-foot yacht, the Zalophus Jr., that could be docked at Catazan, whereas Zalophus was too large to be in the bay. It was too shallow in that area. But this only required a 2-person crew versus 11 or 12 needed to man the Zalophus. So that was a bit of a whirlwind tour of Catazan. I hope you enjoyed it. And just to close, they only lived here very briefly. So the house was their winter home from 1926 to 1929 when Mabel died that summer. And then John Ringling continued to come to Florida until he passed away in 1936 and outlined in his will that the estate, the mansion, the art collection were all to be given to the state of Florida and to be enjoyed by the people of Florida. However, it took nearly 10 years to unravel all of the legal issues surrounding his estate so that the state of Florida could take control. And luckily for us, Catazan still stands as a glamorous icon of the boom years and the roaring 20s. So with that, I encourage you to take a look at our website. You can also search our collections online, and I hope this will entice you to visit Sarasota. And if you're interested in seeing more about what I'm doing behind the scenes, what I'm researching, what we're working on in terms of historic preservation, you're welcome to follow me on Instagram. My handle is Intrepid Curator, so I would love to keep sharing more of Catazan with all of you. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions in the Q&A virtual, and we'll get to some live ones as well. So are there photos of the secret garden?
Yes, it is a beautifully planted garden. I didn't include any photos today since I felt like I had so much to cover, but yes, it's located near the house and it's a very simple burial space. It's nothing like the original crypt that they envisioned.
Another question from the virtual world. What does Zalophus mean?
Oh, Zalophus is Latin for sea lion.
Okay. Do we have other questions virtually? Don't see any. How about in the room? Do we have any questions in the room? Yes.
If they were only going for season, how long was season?
If they were only going for season, how long was season?
They typically would come in November and then they would stay for weeks or months at a time or come back and forth between other cities and states that they were traveling to. So they might be here for a few weeks hosting friends, having parties, and then go away and come back, or John would go on travel. So they often lived very busy lives and they weren't in one place very often, but typically from November to March or April is considered season, and it still is today. We're in season currently with many more residents in Sarasota than the hotter months of the year.
I Any other questions in the room? Did you?
I understand the Gothic references. I kept thinking from the very beginning, and I just took a peek here. It looks very Moroccan, Alcázar, the Spanish touches of it have that feeling, and maybe it's just the Mediterranean. But was there anything there besides the Venetian and Gothic and so forth?
Were you able to hear that, Marissa?
Yes, yes. There are a huge variety of details through the house that I would love to show you, but we would be here all night. So yes, there are many details that show Spanish influence. They imported beautiful floor tiles that are hand glazed and colorful from Spain that are in some of the guest bedrooms and hallways. And there also are a lot of Italianate elements from different periods throughout the house, like above the entrance door to the elevator, there's a beautiful lunette of a Madonna and Child that's inspired by religious art. So there's a huge range of details in the home, and I'm afraid I just didn't have enough time to show you everything tonight. But if you want to see more detail,
Yeah, eclectic.
I post a lot of the details on Instagram. Oh, sorry, I missed that.
And someone asked, did you mention what Cadazan means? You did. So if you want to share that again.
Sure. It is Venetian dialect for House of John. So all of the homes in Venice start with Ca, that means house. So you might have heard of Cadoro, things like that. So it just means House of John.
Any other questions? No? Well, no more here. Well, thank you so much, Marissa. This was absolutely wonderful. And I know we're all ready to go, right? Tonight, especially ready to go visit Cadazan. Thank you again. We'll be down for the road trip.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you.
And we will see you next week. I hope everyone joins us next week for our final grand home as we head a little further south to Vizcaya.
Yes.
In Miami.
Four more.
And we'll find out what Vizcaya means next week.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.